Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who's reached out. I have seen your texts, your DMs, your emails, and I appreciated that my message earlier this week resonated with you in so many powerful ways. And so I thought I would use this day and time to expand on that a little bit. As a way of, just furthering the conversation of the intersection between racial trauma and infertility trauma. In my previous video, I mentioned the Sims experiment, which anyone can Google, but just to give you a brief overview, Dr. Sims was considered the father of gynecology. I never really meant to specialize in that. I was actually kind of annoyed with women, which was kind of, I think, a sign of that time. But he was also a slaveholder. And he carried out very painful experiments on enslaved Africans, thinking that we didn't experience pain. And there is so much rooted in how the medical community has treated African Americans over the years that is kind of embedded, or that message is embedded in that. So we not only have, Dr. Sims as being kind of the forefathers of, the field of gynecology, or the subspecialty of gynecology. We have the Tuskegee experiment where, well, I'm sure you all have heard of that as well. And then we have Henrietta Lacks, where her stolen cells have been used or continue to be used for medical research. She never gave consent. She has now been living in science laboratories far longer than she was ever alive. So that is embedded in this whole system of that impacts, how the Black community interfaces with the medical community. And so it's already difficult enough to access basic medical care or feel safe to do that when the majority of medical providers don't look like you. We've heard the stories. We've, experienced what it's been like when, our family and friends have not been taken seriously because of their pain. And I also have a firsthand experience with that because, for those of you who don't know, my mother struggles with, or not just struggles with, she is a sickle cell patient, and she has the SC derivative of the disease. So while it is not the most lethal version, it is still a very debilitating version and blood disorder where your red blood cells are shaped like sickles. And I won't get into too much of that, but I did watch early on my mom just not get great access to medical care because they felt like she was faking her pain and exhibiting drug-seeking behaviors. And so finally, it's taken a lot of time for us to find medical professionals who take her pain seriously. And still to this day, as long as I've been living, it's been hard to find, a special team. And luckily, we have to do a lot of research to do that. But again, it's that effort that we have to go through to make sure that people don't see our pain through a racialized lens or minimize it. So if you can imagine what it's like for Black individuals to access someone who looks like them and takes their pain seriously, and then apply that to the fertility world. Where there are stereotypes that have gotten perpetuated about, how we're hypersexual or hyperfertile, and we don't have issues with, and how we don't have issues with getting pregnant. And, so those stereotypes have an impact as well. And, and I wanted to also share with you, when we think about these, historical narratives that, are so prevalent in our community and how it impacts fertility, I think it's just, it just really, it stresses the importance of, how much we need to make this a part of the conversation. It's, getting pregnant isn't just as much as, let's think positively or let's have a positive mindset. The anxiety and depression that is felt is very real. And for a lot of us, it's, it's intergenerational. And that's the best way that I can say, We grew up with, racism. It infiltrates, every fiber of our being and how we learn to navigate the world. It impacts me as a clinician and how I work. And so to not see that represented is further isolating. And so, I appreciate you all listening and, allowing me to use this platform and hopefully share this with other people who are just kind of coming into their own realizations about this. But, I wanted to just, kind of share too, some other facts that I didn't get a chance to really talk about before. And, the fact is that, within the Black community, there are more of us who are accessing fertility treatments, but we're less likely to have a positive outcome. We're more likely to experience miscarriages than our white counterparts. And, the rate of preterm births for Black women is significantly higher. And all of that is relevant because what a most recent study by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine for what it found was that, when they controlled for issues around, race and gender or what have you, I mean, like it definitely, how should I say this? It continues to support the growing body of research that states that racism is, and racial issues are, do have an impact on fertility. So I think there are ways that we can use this to make our communities much more inclusive. As we're taking today to elevate, Black voices and Black experiences, I think this is an opportunity to continue to listen and expand on that even further. Check in with your Black clients, your Black friends and family members, and ask them if they're okay. Try to take care of them right now in this space instead of, potentially them, kind of taking care of you if, and your feelings, because this is really tough. This is really tough. And as you're listening to these experiences, sometimes it can be really hard to hear the ways in which, racism has, impacted, us. And so, the way that you're sitting with it is the ways that we've been sitting with this for generations. And I think when people recognize the weight of that, there are a couple of things that happen. There's this shock and disbelief. Oh, it can't happen, or they minimize it. And we've seen what happens when that gets minimized, hence the protesting right now, and it continues to happen over and over again. So, the realization, I think, is hard enough as it is, that racism is as bad as we see. And so there's this shock, this disbelief, and then when that awareness sits in and that heaviness, that's where I find that people can get really overwhelmed. And the action, the reaction at that point is, well, what can I do? And so if you're in this process of you learning and trying to understand your experience and talking with your Black friends and family and clients about this, it is really figuring out for yourself what ways that you can, kind of be a better ally that might not rely on having to always ask as well. And so please don't be offended if, your Black client, family member, or friend says, what, I'm too exhausted, I can't do the work, I can't teach you what this is about. Don't be offended by that. And I know that kind of potentially creates a double bind, but I think there are enough resources out there for everybody to seek the information and to sit with the discomfort and have someone hold space for them around that, but keeping your eyes and ears open to what the Black experience is trying to tell you, because that continues to get squashed. So, I think that is a really important actionable step moving forward as fertility therapists, coaches, and advocacy groups and whatnot. And also I think another step that you can take on an individual and kind of broader level is challenging these racist or racist notions and ideas, not just overtly, but behind closed doors as well. that is also something, that suggests that you're an ally. I know that when we have talked about the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen people create this All Lives Matter kind of movement, and that is particularly hurtful because that's created with the assumption that we are all created equal. And again, as these protests are letting us know that that ideology is not happening, and there's systemic issues in place that have perpetuated the disenfranchisement of Black and brown people in particular in this country. Let's just talk about the Native Americans, and which is another conversation. But things aren't equal, and they haven't been, and so All Lives Matter does not apply, because All Lives Matter didn't occur when George Floyd was murdered, or Breonna Taylor was murdered, or Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, and I could list thousands upon thousands of other Black and brown bodies who have died as a result of this. So this is larger than fertility, and it impacts fertility, and we need to have a pulse on that if we truly believe that we're helping all people. So thank you very much for listening, and be safe, be well, and be vigilant. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.